Hello, reInvent. My name is Carla Stratfold, and I'm Vice President of our Global and Strategic Accounts at Amazon. Thank you so much for joining our virtual event on allyship today with our We Power Tech group. I wish we could all be there in person, even in Las Vegas, but again, grateful that you're joining us. And also joining us today is Amber Cabral. Amber is an inclusion and equity strategist. She focuses on helping organizations of various sizes across many industries achieve sustainable leadership and inclusion objectives. She is the founder and principal consultant at Cabral Company, where her work has touched thousands of people, including Fortune 500 executives and senior leaders at global and multinational organizations. And Amber is also the author of Allies and Advocates, which is a book she just published this week, which is pretty damn exciting. So as part of today's conversation, we're going to talk about the role that allyship plays, and hopefully we're going to get some tips and best practices on how each of us in our personal journey towards being better allies can put into practice at our organization. So Amber, welcome. Pleased to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be able to participate in this event. I mean, even though we're virtual and Vegas is one of my favorite places, I am still happy to be able to participate virtually.
We will get back there someday.
That's right.
So if it's okay with you, I'm going to dive right in and ask first question.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So what qualities or skills define the outstanding inclusive leaders that you've encountered in your career as an inclusion, diversity, and equity strategist? And how can leaders develop their personal capability for leading inclusively?
Yeah, as far as the qualities and skills, the number one for, inclusive leaders is listening. You can't include people that you're not paying attention to, that you're not willing to hear. So the first thing you have to be willing to do is listen, to turn those ears on and say, okay, I want to actually figure out what I can, hear and learn that's different than what I already know. That's the first thing. The second is, be prepared to apologize. When you're navigating different identities and different cultures, people sometimes think, particularly leaders, tend to think of apologies as like some kind of admission of weakness, or perhaps in some way it means that they're at fault, but really an apology is a strength, and so you can build a lot of strong connections and relationships by apologizing. So know how to meaningfully apologize, and I can give an example of how to do that in a bit. And then the third thing that comes to mind is be willing to get uncomfortable. We tend to be really married to and attached to our own comfort. And so we will go out of our way to be comfortable. We will pay extra money to be comfortable. And so when you're thinking about being an inclusive leader, we have to be willing to put our own comfort behind that first thing I mentioned, which is, being willing to listen or having the opportunity to learn from someone else. And sometimes that means that we have to get out of our comfort zones. We already know that growth comes from discomfort. Of course, Amazonians know that, right? So I think it's, having those three skills or qualities are going to help you to be able to kind of grow your capacity as an inclusive leader. And then how you develop those is practice, just like anything else. A lot of these characteristics are innate. Like, we used to do a lot of listening when we were young, but as we get older and we become leaders, we tend to do a bit more talking, right? We tend to be the people that folks lean on to get things done. And instead, sometimes we have to remind ourselves to turn those ears on and put ourselves back in the position of the learner. Like, we are always in some way supposed to be in the position of the learner. So, putting yourself in that mindset is, going to help you to develop. You practice it, you practice learning, you practice listening, you practice apologizing, you practice being willing to put yourself in an uncomfortable space so that you have the opportunity to exercise those muscles, and you'll become a more inclusive leader just by doing those things.
Put your ears on.
Put your ears on. So my question that I want to ask you first is specifically, as it relates to how you work and role model inclusion in AWS. Can you share why inclusion and equity are so important to you?
Yeah, I'll share why inclusion and equity and diversity are important. At Amazon, we're all about customer obsession. We believe that if we listen to our customers' problems and really seek to understand them, we'll build things that solve their problems and help them get to their outcomes better and faster. And it's very hard um, to be truth seekers if you don't have a diverse environment and a diverse set of inputs. And even if you have a diverse set of inputs, if the people who are providing that diverse perspective don't feel like they're included, like they can bring all of their authentic selves to work and don't feel like they have a safe space to share their opinions and their experience and their knowledge, then we won't get to the truth that we seek on behalf of our customers. And, as a white woman executive, with a lot of privilege, I think it's really important that people like me, and actually, this is a journey, this allyship is a journey for all individuals. I think it's really important that we stand up and show that it's okay to have these courageous conversations, show that it's okay to stand up for what we believe is right. Because when people of privilege do that, especially like white men like Jeff Bezos, and this isn't a direct quote, but I was really empowered when his response to a person sent an email in and said that they were going to stop buying on Amazon.com because Amazon.com had Black Lives Matter banners running. And they said they were no longer going to buy there as a result of that. And Jeff said, you're exactly the kind of customer I'm okay losing. And so I think when people of privilege believe in diversity, believe in equity, I think it's our duty to stand up and make an inclusive environment for everybody. In fact, I think for us, it's good for our customers and it's good for society.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you speak so directly about privilege because sometimes we don't recognize our own privilege. And so when you come across someone that does and they're looking for ways to share it, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it's hard to recognize. I mean, my journey,
Yeah.
you talked about having open ears and apologizing. I've been doing a lot of that because you're vulnerable. You
Yeah.
have to put yourself out there to embrace your privilege and speak up when others aren't in the room.
Yeah.
So I have another question for you.
Yeah.
What advice or encouragement would you give to those of us who seek to practice inclusive leadership and allyship in our own workplace? And how do you measure your impact as an ally to marginalized communities?
That's a really great question. I do think that people like results, particularly a company like Amazon. Those results mean a lot. So people are always interested in like, how am I doing at this inclusive leadership, allyship thing? And so I can really appreciate the meaning behind this question. And I have to admit that like we have to be a lot more open to the qualitative as it relates to measurement. When I am looking to make sure that I'm making an impact, of course, I think about what dollars I can share and, how I can, learn from their messaging and therefore show up as an ally in support of or role modeling the right behavior, for whichever marginalized community I may be supporting. But sometimes the measurement is really in, a very qualitative experience. People telling me, I really appreciate you showing up. Hey, I learned a lot from you. Thanks for being here today. And so I want to encourage people that are on the allyship journey, that are learning exactly how to show up as an ally, to take a lot of value in those qualitative things. These are people. This is people work. And so what people have to say about how the work is being done is incredibly important and valuable. And so the measurement is often that. Now, definitely, think about the ways you can use your dollars. And so I know a few people that are being very purposeful. For example, this holiday season, they are trying to make sure that they are spending with businesses that are marginalized, and perhaps giving donations to Black-led organizations or things like that. So you can also do that, and that's a more tangible measure. But the real value is, there's a quote that I think it's Maya Angelou that says, people might not remember what you did or what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. And that's how you want to think about the way you show up as an ally. Now, as far as like advice or encouragement for those who are seeking to practice allyship and want to bring it into the workplace, my best piece of advice is please, please, please speak up. Kind of going back to what you said in your last response to my question, it does take bravery. It does take commitment. It does take a willingness to evolve and learn, but like, I need to hear your voices. I need you to be willing to say something when you see something that's not quite right. I need you to be willing, and particularly if I am a marginalized identity in the room and you are not, I'm really eager to hear you speak up when you see or hear something that's not quite right. And that's hard. We are often, we're kind of put in this position of like, I'm not going to say anything unless I have to, or unless it has something to do with me or something like that. Where allyship requires, like, if you want to be an ally, if you truly want to bring that into your workplace, you've got to do the hard work of speaking up. And there's a few ways you can do it. So, one of the easiest ways that I always give people, you hear something not quite right, you just want to check in, take a temperature, see, yeah, maybe I can make some adjustments here. You can say something very subtle. So you can say, say more about that. All right. I'm not sure that I understand where you were going with that. Can you give me some perspective? Right. Just really easy way to speak up, because I know people are nervous, right? They're afraid to say something. This could potentially be an uncomfortable conversation. The other option is to be a bit more direct in saying something, when you're doing your speaking up, and say, I'm sure you mean well, but I'm a little concerned about that approach, right? And then you can kind of make another suggestion after that. Perhaps a better way to do that would be this, right? That gives that person a little bit of grace to say, oh, I didn't think about that, and not have to necessarily feel beat up on. But you also get the opportunity to kind of show up as an ally and say, wait, there's a better way to make sure that we're connecting to our marginalized identities here, that we're showing up in a way that's meaningful for the people that we want to support. So it's, that's probably the best encouragement I can give people is be brave and be prepared to speak up, because that's the thing that I think happens the least. I've had many conversations where people have circled behind after and been like, oh, I saw and I heard this thing and it was so bothersome to me and I just wasn't sure what to say. And there is so much power in actually being brave enough to actually speak up in the moment, and having courageous conversations. Like, sometimes you speak up in the moment and you still circle back, and I know the AWS does this, right? They're having courageous conversations at work, so it's, how can I make sure that I circle back around and say, let's make sure we have a conversation about this particular thing so that we know how to show up in this space and be a responsible ally. Like, I know the things, I know how to connect, I know how to speak up and be supportive. And so that's probably the biggest piece of encouragement. And then, also just at that point, once you start speaking up, you'll start to get that measure, that measure you're looking for, those people coming back around and saying, hey, great job. I really appreciate you speaking up in there. I really, I value your support. That's when you'll start to get that measurement that tells you, oh my gosh, I'm actually showing up as an ally.
Use your voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Carla. I really appreciate that. I have another question for you. So my next question is, one of the key parts of being an ally is showcasing empathy. And I think that you do that very well from the short time that we've had the opportunity to know each other. And so at times it's been suggested, though, that empathy, or really emotions of any kind, don't necessarily have a place in the tech space, or particularly in tech workplaces. What are your thoughts on empathy and the role that it plays in the workplace?
Yeah, you gave a quote from Maya, and it said, "People won't really remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel." And I am quite certain that, and I think we would all agree that there are emotions that don't belong in the workplace. I've probably brought some of those a few times over the years myself, but empathy is certainly not an emotion that doesn't belong in the workplace. And in fact, I think it might be, to your point about using your voice and helping other people feel like they have a safe space to use their own. It might be one of the key tools. Certainly for me, over the last, I guess, 8, 9 months, I've learned so much. Our single-threaded owner, Susie Collins, who's the person who owns diversity, equity, and inclusion for my entire org, did an intersectionality class. She's done many now, but for my directs. And a couple hours later, it was so eye-opening for all of us that every day, we bring multiple roles to our job, and every day the people that we work with as well are bringing those roles. And for people from marginalized communities, they may not feel comfortable feeling safe and bringing their authentic selves. And, I think I said at the beginning, if you don't feel safe sharing your diverse opinion, you won't feel safe using your voice. Um, we don't get to truth. And so I think empathy is very important. And the way to implement that is to teach it. Now, you talked about, speaking up, representing somebody who's not at the table when you hear something that's wrong, that needs to be corrected. That's hard to do. But I think having empathy, having learned about other people's intersectionality and embracing empathy, helps you step out there with your voice. Even though many times when I do this, even with my privilege, even with my title, my hands sweat, my heart beats a little bit, I feel very vulnerable. Um, but I like that feeling because I feel that it is kind of the empathy that's allowing me to connect to people differently than I would have. And if I really am a truth seeker on behalf of my customer and my company, and frankly, as a human, I think we really have to embrace it. I think there's loads of room for empathy as an emotion in our workplace.
I love that. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I also think that like those sweaty hands, they kind of go away after a while. It takes a little practice and then eventually it'll go away.
I keep practicing. All right. So I have another question for you. At AWS, we're very excited for the release of your new book, Allies and Advocates, which you and I talked about the other day. And I had mentioned that it was so timely. So much has happened. Everybody knows what those things are in the last 7, 8, 9 months. And this book feels very timely. And I'm curious, and I'm sure our listeners are curious. What was your catalyst to write the book, and what was your story behind it?
Thank you so much for asking that. Yeah, this has been a labor of love. So this is the book. I have it here. It's called
Yay.
Allies and Advocates. It has my big old mug on the cover. And yeah, that's a really great question. I've always wanted to be an author. It's always been something I wanted to do since I was, probably as far back as, kindergarten or first grade. And the thing that kind of tipped me into this book was really accidental, but not at the same time. So I started shortly after the murder of George Floyd. I started teaching a course called From Ally to Advocate. It was at the request of a few clients. They were looking for something that helped people to understand, like, what does allyship mean? How do you show up as an advocate? Why is that important, particularly in the workplace? Just because there were so many responses to that incident. Like, it was definitely a turning point in a lot of very powerful ways, both in workplaces and just in our own communities. And so I built the course just, thinking, okay, I'll run this class because that's what, the client has asked for. But it was so popular. And the course is essentially telling you the steps to show up as an ally and also the steps to show up as an advocate, like in a very practical, digestible, easy to access way. Like these are the things that you do, because I felt like the thing I was hearing the most often was, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I don't know what the steps are. And so I was like, well, let's make it simple. Like, let me give you the, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s of this thing. And so I designed the course for that. And it was really popular. It just, probably between the end of May and the end of June, I think I must have run it at least 30 times. Like, it was, just consistently asked for. People were reaching out for it. I'm still running it today. And so one of the sessions I did at the end of June was at kind of the pushing of both a, coach that I speak to and one of my staff. They were like, other people need this. It needs to be out in the world. Like, it needs to be, public facing, because of course, the most of the work that I do is, it's B2B, my business to your business. And so they were saying, well, we need to see this somewhere else. And so I said, okay, well, maybe I can do an outward facing course. So I, took a chance, built it so I could teach it outward facing, and people actually signed up to attend. And one of the women who attended the course was an acquisitions editor, which I didn't know was a thing. Like, I didn't know that there were people whose job it was to like go out and find authors, but it is. That's a real thing. And so she ended up going through the course, loving it. She reached out to me on social media because I'm very active on Instagram and LinkedIn. And she sent me a note that basically was like, hey, I was in your course. I thought it was amazing. By the way, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, of course I've thought about writing a book. We end up getting on a phone call and deciding, okay, let's do it. And so I had a really short turnaround because, to your point, the book is very timely because it was written just a few months ago. I started it in mid-July. I finished it in mid-August. And it was quick to market book. They edited it and sent it to press, and here we are now in November, and it's out. So it was a very quick process. But one of the things that stood out to me about that conversation I had with her, that very first conversation, I asked, like, what made you ask me to do this? And she said, because in our class, one of the things that you said to me or said to the group was, how can you use your privilege in your day-to-day life? What do you have access to that like no one else does? And she said, I make authors, and most of the authors I make are male or white. And here I have this person in front of me that clearly has all this content that would be a great, like ad for a book. So why not ask her to do that? And so it was so impactful for me that she took something from the course and it literally turned into an opportunity for me. And it's such an amazing example of allyship that just really goes ahead and literally pushes allyship forward. So that's how the book happened. So it was kind of a combination of like, I've always wanted to write a book, and then just kind of the perfect combination of the right opportunity and the right, kind of crossing of paths happening so that it could come to life.
Yeah. Thank you for
Yeah.
that. It's a great story and great example of put it out there and it can happen. Um, I'm really proud of you for doing it, and I'm super grateful because as a white privileged female executive with a passion for creating an equitable society, I've found it really hard to know where I could go. I watched movies to get educated. I've read various authors over time, but this is a journey. It is not something that you take a few courses and then you know how to say allyship or
Yeah.
um, different terminology. And so I'm very grateful that you spent the time to put this out there. For those of you interested, there's this little place called Amazon.com where you can get it.
Yes.
I have it on my Kindle. Uh, it's also available in hardback, right? Are you doing the voice for it? Is it going to be on Audible?
Yes, it is going to be on Audible. I just recorded the audio for it last week. It was really hard to read, but yeah, it'll be on Audible in January. So the hardcover released November 17th. I think the electronic version came out about a week before, and then we'll have the final, additional media option in the Audible version in January.
That's great. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us today, and to everybody listening. I'm sure we all learned some things, some tips and tricks. Um,
I've got one more question, Carla.
oh, you do?
I do. Just one more. My last question is, how do you use your position of privilege? You speak so confidently about your privilege, and I think that that's such an admirable thing. How
Mhm.
do you use your position of privilege to speak up for marginalized communities and get your team on board? Like, how do you bring them along as you kind of take this journey on inclusion, diversity, and equity?
Okay. Um, so this is not rocket science. It certainly takes intention. So, number one, I'd say be intentional. Number two, put your money where your mouth is. If this is important, you ought to have what we call at Amazon a single threaded leader or owner. And I do. Susie Collins is not only the woman who helps us with programs, but asked me in our first meeting some really difficult questions. Have you ever experienced racism? And that's when the palms started sweating and my heart started beating. And so that those are a couple things. One, have somebody own it. So make a decision that this is important to you. Put your money where your mouth is. Roll out programs. So, for example, I mentioned the intersectionality programs that we're rolling out across the entire organization. It's not just my organization, lots of organizations at Amazon. Learn how to lead an inclusive meeting. by asking the people. It's a little harder, virtually, but it's quite doable. So make sure that we're asking people for their input. Teaching people, or I guess at my level, saying, I know this isn't easy. I know it's important to be inclusive. I know it's hard to use your voice sometimes. And then, I get pretty vulnerable when I share my story. I'm getting better at talking about the mistakes that I've made where I was in meetings where I should have been an ally for a different represented group and didn't do it. So I guess I would say being vulnerable. And then there are programs that I think, like you said, people were asking for the information from the class. You turned it into a book. We just had a session last week that was facilitated for white men on how to be allies. And, talk about courage to attend these sessions and say, hey, I want to learn that I have white privilege and I want to talk about it. Not, again, that's where the empathy comes in, is being able to talk to each other about what we're learning on this journey. And then, I just ask questions. If we have an interview loop, is there a diverse set of people on the loop? If we are hiring diverse candidates, do we have in their onboarding package a set of programs that are designed for this group of people? Are we getting feedback when people haven't quite found their voice and yet they're uncomfortable? Do we have a way for people to feel, even in an anonymous way, that they can give their input? And so, I don't, and also talking to other companies, I find that in my conversations with a lot of executives around the world, everyone is looking to be a more inclusive leader and to find how they can play a role in society and in their corporations. And I found it really gratifying to ask people what is working for their particular companies. And companies are doing things, all the way from HPE, who have an education program where they're starting young in school systems. There's a lot going on out there that's good. So thank you for asking. I think we've got a lot more to do, though.
Well, it sounds like you're definitely on the right track. I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation today and just kind of exchange some ideas. I think you're 100% spot on about, making sure that you're having conversations with other organizations and people that are your peers, even when they are across the globe, because you're right. Everyone is on this journey. And the more we can see it as a journey we're taking together, the more impactful it's going to be.
Yeah, I think your together is spot on. There is a lot of opportunity to drive great change in society right now, and so Amber, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
For
you.
all of you watching, again, wish I could be there with you. Thank you for taking time out of your day. We understand that your time is valuable, and you voted. I used to say with your feet, but you probably didn't have to walk that far to watch this. But thank you so much for engaging in such an important conversation. And I wish everybody well on their own personal journey.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Amber.
All righty.